4 a.m. The control room's fluorescent lights hummed a deceptive calm. His coffee sat untouched beside him when the first alarm sliced through the room. Another followed, then another. Operators froze. The gauges glowed green, but the floor beneath them vibrated. Over the intercom, the shift supervisor's voice crackled. Readings are stable. Follow standard protocol. But nothing about this felt stable. If every expert told you it was safe, but your instinct screamed otherwise, who would you trust? One operator leaned in toward the panel, trying to steady his breathing. 5 minutes had passed, or maybe 50. He couldn't tell anymore. His coffee had gone cold. His hands were shaking. This wasn't a malfunction. This was the beginning of a meltdown, and the men in that room didn't have a word for it yet. For nearly a decade, America had been promised the same future. Nuclear power would be clean, safe, predictable. 3 Mile Island wasn't just a plant. It was a monument to that belief. Operators trusted the instruments. Engineers trusted the design. The entire system rested on one assumption. If the machine said it was safe, then it was safe. In the minutes after the turbine tripped, alarms flared across the control room. A chaos the crew had rehearsed hundreds of times. Yet amid the noise, one indicator refused to join the panic. The light showing the PORV valve was closed. It glowed with quiet confidence, reassuring, certain, and completely wrong. Coolant was escaping through a valve that had failed open, but the instruments weren't designed to show the physical position, only the electrical command that told it to close. The command had been sent. The valve never obeyed. When the data insists you're safe, but your instincts say otherwise, which one do you trust? Minutes later, one operator finally voiced the doubt everyone else tried to suppress. Why does the panel say normal when everything feels wrong? That question should have changed everything. Instead, it disappeared into the alarm noise. Because the truth was brutal. The system wasn't lying. It simply couldn't see the disaster happening behind the walls. So the crew followed protocol, trying to correct a problem they believed existed, while the real threat grew hotter, louder, and more irreversible with every passing second. Inside the control room, alarms weren't screaming. They were whispering. Soft tones, a dozen little blips that never matched the violence unfolding below. When pressure spiked after the turbine trip, a safety valve opened, exactly as it should. Seconds later, the electrical signal to close it was sent. The indicator light on the panel went out. The operators assumed the valve had obeyed. It hadn't. The PORV was stuck open, silently bleeding superheated coolant into the containment below. The instruments couldn't show the physical truth. They only showed the command. Up on the screens, another reading jumped. The pressurizer level was rising. To the crew, that meant one terrifying thing their training had drilled into them. Don't let the system go solid. Overfilling could wreck the reactor. So when the emergency core cooling system kicked in automatically, they did what they'd been taught. They throttled it back. They stopped the pumps. They believed they were saving the plant. If the instruments tell you one thing and your senses tell you another, which do you trust? That choice sealed the reactor's fate. With the PORV stuck and pumps reduced, water levels in the core fell. Steam formed where liquid should have been. A thermal barrier that stopped cooling and baked the fuel rods. Hot zirconium met steam. The metal began stripping oxygen from water and, in the process, produced hydrogen, a colorless, invisible, potentially explosive gas quietly filling the spaces the instruments could not see. The screens upstairs told a comfortable story. Down in the vessel, the core was moving toward a point of no return. Within hours of the accident, the first official statements hit the airwaves. A comm company spokesman sat behind a podium, reading from a prepared card. This is a minor industrial incident. Everything is stable. There is no danger to the public. Local radio repeated it nonstop. Minor incident. Everything under control. But inside the Pennsylvania governor's office, the phones never stopped. Confidential NRC updates were painting a very different picture. Coolant loss, radiation release, and a reactor whose condition no one could confirm with confidence. Officials flipped through conflicting pages, one reassuring, one alarming. No one knew which to believe. One aide reportedly summarized the nightmare choice. If we tell people to evacuate, the highways will explode. If we stay quiet and we're wrong, people could die. So state leaders did what they thought would prevent mass panic. They waited. By the next morning, radiation readings were fluctuating, and the gap between public messaging and private fear was widening. Police cruisers quietly rolled through the closest neighborhoods, not with sirens, but with quiet knocks. Just as a precaution, pregnant women and young children should consider leaving the area. Meanwhile, on the next street over, a local official calmly told reporters the opposite. Please remain indoors. There is no need for evacuation. People didn't need expertise. The contradictions were enough. By Friday morning, schools closed early. Traffic on I-283 jammed instantly as families packed pets, photo albums, and hurriedly grabbed belongings. Neighbors argued on front lawns. Do we trust them or get out now? If officials told you everything was safe, but your neighbor's car was packed for an evacuation, what would you do? That same day, a new message reached federal officials. The core was failing, and deep inside the reactor, hydrogen was building. Late Friday evening, nearly 2 full days after the accident began, engineers finally pieced together something everyone had missed. A massive hydrogen bubble was trapped inside the dome of the reactor vessel. Hydrogen had been forming since Wednesday morning, born when superheated zirconium began ripping oxygen from water. It wasn't poetic. It was violent chemistry, eating away at what was left of the core. But the truly terrifying part wasn't the chemistry. It was the size. No one knew how big the bubble was. Thousands of cubic feet, tens of thousands. Early calculations produced wildly different answers. And if the bubble grew, or if it ignited, analysts feared it could rupture the pressure vessel and potentially threaten the integrity of the containment building. By early Saturday morning, emergency teams were in analytical freefall. At NRC headquarters in Washington, whiteboards filled with frantic sketches, pressure gradients, gas volumes, ignition thresholds. One group believed the bubble was stable. Another believed it might be expanding toward the top of the vessel. A third warned that if oxygen somehow mixed into the dome, it could trigger a detonation that might rupture the vessel and compromise containment. Late that morning, a message arrived during a tense conference call. The bubble might not be dispersing. The silence that followed lasted nearly half a minute. Hours later, at a press briefing, officials tried to keep their voices steady as reporters asked the question no one wanted to say out loud. Is an explosion possible? The answer came slow, measured, and unconvincing. We don't believe so. If the experts can't agree whether a reactor is stable or seconds from detonation, what would you believe? Because the truth was even stranger. That bubble held a secret no one had realized yet. One that would decide the fate of the entire disaster. When the hydrogen threat was finally declared over, officials moved fast to calm the public. The message was simple, repeated in every briefing, every press release, every televised statement. The radiation release was minor, barely above natural background levels. Equivalent, they said, to a chest x-ray, maybe 2. But outside the plant, the story didn't match the numbers. Residents across Middletown reported a strange, metallic taste coating their tongues. Children developed sudden nosebleeds. Families stepped onto their porches to find pets vomiting, wildlife lying still in the grass, and dairy cows collapsing in nearby fields. Some described a low fog that settled over the farms that morning, one that made their skin prickle. Officially, nothing dangerous had escaped. Unofficially, people felt their own bodies contradicting the government. If your body said something was wrong, and the government swore you were safe, who would you trust? Within weeks, local doctors began documenting clusters of symptoms they couldn't explain. Unusual rashes, sudden respiratory issues, alarming spikes in thyroid disorders. And in the years that followed, epidemiologists clashed over a new, uncomfortable pattern. Cancer clusters forming in the exact regions where residents reported the strongest fallout. State and federal agencies insisted the data was solid. The models were accurate. The radiation dose was insignificant. But by then, the trust was already broken. Because for the people who lived through it, the danger wasn't measured in millirems. It was measured in funerals, medical bills, and the feeling of being lied to when it mattered most. And that betrayal, the collapse of trust, would become the most permanent injury 3 Mile Island ever inflicted. Long after the alarm stopped, something far more corrosive began spreading, silently. The official story claimed the worst was avoided. No meltdown, minimal radiation, contained, controlled, clean. But inside the community, a different kind of disaster began unfolding. People didn't just fear the plant anymore. They feared the silence around it. Every headache, every cough, every unusual diagnosis in the years that followed carried a shadow. Was this from 3 Mile Island? Psychologists later found something striking. The residents closest to the plant showed stress patterns similar to soldiers returning from deployment. Hypervigilance, sleep disruption, a constant scanning for invisible threats. The paradox? The closer people lived to the plant, the less they trusted the reassurances they were given. Because once the truth becomes negotiable, everything does. 3 Mile Island didn't just fracture a reactor. It fractured the bond between a population and the institutions meant to protect them, leaving a wound that never fully healed.